today is on ego dissolution mainly. Just as a show of hands, does anyone meditate here? Oh, wow. Okay, any Buddhists? Okay, great. Okay. So, well, I'll introduce the topic. I'm going to be talking about bridging ancient wisdom with modern healing, and particularly ego dissolution in Buddhist frameworks. So these Buddhist frameworks are fantastic at integrating these expanded states using depth and care. And I'm particularly going to be looking at the Theravada Buddhist guidance on this. I'm not aiming to merge psychedelics and Buddhism in any way. I'm looking to use Buddhist frameworks to support psychedelic experiences. They're not entirely the same, but there's a lot of psychological transformations that happen with Buddhist expanded states that are permanent and are aimed for in the path. And we can use these frameworks, these narratives, to support integration of some very blissful, expansive psychedelic states, as well as some of the challenging states. I do want to talk about, before we discuss this, why Eastern traditions. 2,000 years or so of exploring transcendental states. If we look back to the early texts, Vedic period, we see hymns where the wandering Muni was celebrated in his intoxicated state of bliss. That was always cherished, that was always nurtured. This transpersonal experience, this godlike state, was always cultivated within the culture. There weren't any cultural barriers to exploring these states. And we can see this through thousands of years of rich textual tradition and a really complex system of different traditions, different practices, all with the same idea of ending human suffering. Psychological suffering, permanent freedom from psychological suffering, and in some instances, rebirth. So, before I discuss the path or the maps, I do want to talk about some of the issues with mapping meditative frameworks onto psychedelic therapy. So we do have to be careful about imposing metaphysical frameworks or metaphysical models on a psychedelic experience. These fixed frameworks potentially can disempower an individual's direct experience and their interpretation of that experience. So one's own realization can sometimes be the rewards, the enlightening experience. We also risk imposing mystical frameworks or potentially psychotic states or states that arise from trauma, which need a little bit more attention. So looking at the nuances in these experiences is really, really important, but hopefully that's what we're going to get to today. Epistemological humility as well. So not all patients are going to relate to Eastern traditions. So forcing these models can create cognitive dissonance or make them feel alienated. So that's something to consider as well. And then, of course, transference and counter-transference. A therapist might unwittingly or unknowingly project their worldview onto clients, onto their experiences as well. So that's something to really be mindful of. So they're really just guides. These maps I want to share today are guides. And I want to share the narratives that surround the mystical states and how these narratives steer practitioners on a path towards liberation. So yeah, and again, we have obviously within psychedelic therapy a very strong sense of therapeutic ethics and harm reduction as a client-led basis, ensuring that one's own metaphysical interpretation doesn't override someone else's personal insights. So these are things to really consider. I also want to, before I discuss this, just acknowledge colonialism and how a lot of Indian traditions and modern translations or colonial translations had a lot of bias through Victorian Christian values as well. So this caused a long-lasting harm to how Eastern traditions were understood in the West. So I think it's really important to acknowledge these power imbalances. Colonialism didn't just misrepresent, it actively suppressed and sometimes outlawed some of these practices. So I do think it's really important to, whenever we can, amplify or cite scholars, practitioners and thinkers from within the cultures And stay in conversation, stay open from those who are within the tradition, and stay open to correction as well. So that's something I really want to highlight. So today, I'm going to be using these models from the Theravada tradition. I'm particularly going to be focusing on these meditation manuals. These are meditation manuals based on a text Vishuddhimagga by Buddha Ghosha, which was an early text. A lot of Theravada practices are based on this text, and of course the Pali Canon, which is the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the teachings, the methodology taught by the Buddha. But these meditation manuals are kind of phenomenological experiences. So the abbot of the monk will write these texts for practitioners, lay people, and monks. So when they go into really, really deep states of absorption, these states are described and in a kind of linear fashion. So when people experience these expanded states, they know how to position them on the path. So I'm going to be talking about some of the insights from these texts. Okay, so let's, in terms of paralleling these psychedelic experience and the enlightenment experience, let's just have a look at some of the expanded states of consciousness that happen from psychedelics. So we have, as meta study with so many studies in understanding, categorizing, exploring different types of expanded states, such as emotional breakthrough, increased psychological flexibility, so that would be being able to reframe an experience or position oneself in a different perspective from one's experience. Mystical experiences like oceanic boundlessness or insightfulness, so a blissful state where one's consciousness, one's thoughts stop and one's consciousness just expands beyond the limits of the cognitive thinking mind into a very blissful state. Universal connectedness where ego dissolution happens where the boundaries of oneself dissolve and merge into the other. So these are very common psychedelic experiences, mystical states that happen from psychedelic experiences, if we're lucky. And they're transformational, they're changing. They change one's point of view, they change one's perspective, and they change one's psychology. And that is very much the same in the Buddhist path. So within this particular tradition, now there's lots of traditions that would focus and highlight the different outcome methodology path. Within this particular tradition, they look at, much like Mathie was describing earlier, the jhanas. We have samadhi states, deep absorption states, would be a kind of preliminary practice. Mastering samadhi, being able to still the mind on one object long enough for the cognitive mind to shut down and absorption to happen so that insight arises. And this would be the first, second, third, and fourth jhana, the very ecstatic, blissful states. The first and the second jhana are very too blissful, too ecstatic. It's a norepinephrine and dopamine flooding the body. And we can see this in fMRI scanners from very advanced meditators who master the jhanas. And then you get to the fourth jhana, which is in the Buddhist practice. This particular tradition is where we want to be. In this type of absorption, there's no more cognitive processing going on. You drop very deeply into a state of absorption where you're able to analyze the constructs of our reality. So it's beyond your kind of sensory experience. That part of the mind of processing and analyzing objects isn't functioning anymore, but you're able to witness and experience the subatomic structure of things, the quantum foam of consciousness, if you like. So the material jhanas are less important on this path, but they are expanded states beyond the body. It's really important that we stay in the body so that you can start to analyze the basic constructs of consciousness in itself. And this is where we get to ego dissolution. I'm going to talk about the insight knowledges in Vipassana Yana. These are the, does anyone practice Vipassana? Okay, right. So in very advanced stages of Vipassana, we enter into these 16 stages of insight, which I want to highlight first, actually, the difference between the gradual process and the quick psychedelic process In Eastern traditions, they really stress the importance of preliminary practices, loving kindness, mitabhavana. We want to cultivate a kind of ground level where we would get rid of any kind of hostile attribution bias, get rid of any kind of trauma in the physical body done by scanning the sensorial experience of trauma in the body, kind of observing that and letting that kind of exercise itself through the system. But this is really important. We're cultivating the skill of mindfulness, the ability to keep your mind steady when the world seems to be spinning around you, the ability to keep your focus fixed on one point. That's a muscle that we can all train. It's something that really helps these extraordinary expanded states and navigate our way through them when they can be very challenging. The psychedelic experience often bypasses these preparatory stages, and so integrating psychedelic experiences can be very challenging. And we have a lot of reports on the non-specific amplifier. Stanislav Grof came up with this term. And so, I mean, maybe some of you probably experienced how psychedelics can amplify your mood, thought, and narrative, hence setting being so important in one's experience. But this can spiral sometimes. This rumination can get out of hand, potentially. So these one-pointed practices, learning to still the mind, fix the mind on one point, are really important to focus that inner experience, so keep bringing that experience inner and inner and inner. It's for the dissolution, for the ego dissolution process to happen. And they would use mantras or objects to help kind of anchor that tension. So these are really good methods, you know, in the psychedelic experience, things to anchor the attention, to stop it from spiraling, to stop the mind from spiraling out of control. Another issue, potentially, is the challenge of euphoria and fantasy. So these ecstatic states are very seductive. They can lead to pride, fantasy, or maybe false certainty as well. And it's really important when we look at the path of a yogi and enlightenment, we're looking at the aim is dissolution, not indulgence. The aim is to thin the personality, to reduce the ego, because it's the ego that causes all the psychological suffering. So the methods all are there to reduce that process, to produce the collapsing in on oneself. So that's why the bliss experiences can be pretty precarious, in that they kind of, you know, you want more of them. Everybody wants more of the blissful experiences. And it's a normal thing within the Buddhist tradition. It's not pathologized in any way. It's considered one of Mara's armies. It happens to everyone. But when people get into their meditation, you get steady, you get established, you get absorption. And it's all doable. People do it all the time in meditation retreats. It's just effort, diligence, and practice. But these are some of the experiences that happen. So real extreme states of bliss, like waves of energy pulsing through the body, a lightness. Sometimes people experience light coming out of the body, the walls, everything, calmness, real deep calmness, a kind of spiritual faith can arise as well. Determination or strength as well, effortless meditation. All of these things are quite common in meditation experience and psychedelic experiences. But they call them the 10 imperfections of insight. So there's a real narrative in the Buddhist tradition around these experiences. And the reason is because they're dangerous. They're dangerous areas to hang out in, because people can get lost in delusions of grandeur, or messianic complexes, or pride. And so that's why this narrative is really reinforced. And of course, with the preliminary practices of mindfulness and metaphysical, then it's easy to just kind of let those thoughts of attachment pass, let the experience happen and pass without creating any kind of dialogue around it, without creating any kind of meaning around it. It's like cleaning out the plumbing. That's kind of all it is, really. And not to make a big deal out of it, because it's not the experiences that enlighten you. In this tradition, but it does clear out an ability to see deeper the nature of reality. We get these experiences as well, of course, in psychedelic experiences, and that can lead to a lot of desire for more of these extraordinary experiences, attachment to non-ordinary states. Kind of mystical materialism. We all want the big experience, which is normal. And of course, we come up with all of these, or the mind can generate all of these kind of attachments to these big experiences as well. And that's not, they're very nourishing as well. They're very beautiful to have, and they can change the mind, and they can open the mind up to all of these wonderful perspectives of the world. But what we want to aim for within the Buddhist praxis is an ability to dissolve the ego in a way that doesn't cause too much imbalances, too much destabilization. So this sudden ego dissolution can be quite destabilizing. And the structured practices, the narratives around the practices and the experiences can really help this experience happen in a nourishing way, in a positive way, with a positive psychological outcome. So we want to... So early on in the meditation processes, these Kundalini experiences can happen. And teachers really try and keep people on the path without letting them slip into delusion, without letting them slip into mistaking these experiences for enlightenment. And this is particularly in the Buddhist path. There's also increased sensitivity. So this, of course, happens with psychedelic experiences as well. And the preliminary practices here are designed to kind of help people, support people when they develop this sensitivity. There's a vulnerability that comes with that as well. So when you're in a room full of people, there could be a tendency to see the world as maybe someone has a hostile attribution bias or feels threatened, maybe. So the idea in Buddhist practice is not to dull down that sensitivity, but to develop loving kindness practices, or to help train the mind to incline towards more wholesome states of mind, more loving states of mind. And this is really important. It's really supportive for ego dissolution states. It centers the individual rather than fragments the individual. So let's talk about ego dissolution. 10 minutes, is it? Okay. So the Buddhist metaphysics, they see consciousness existing as little particles of conscious experience, like bubbles or plasma, that rise and pass away, one after another. These are called dhammas in Pali. There is nothing else other than this. Consciousness experiences a dhamma arise, and that has a characteristic or a quality to it, and that is a phenomenological experience of reality. And that arises and passes away multiple times a second. And so to a Buddhist, this is all reality is. So the ego dissolution part is, through the training of samadhi practices, being able to actually see the constructs of our conscious reality, being able to examine and analyze each dhamma as it arises in your consciousness and passes away into nothing. And so the 16 stages of insight are processes of seeing this. And we can see this in texts like the Abhidharma. This is all of Buddha's enlightened disciples got together after his parinibbana, after his death, and disclosed all their experiences, like, oh, what happened to you when you got enlightened? So they had a chat, and they wrote Abhidharma, and this is what they describe in the Abhidharma. So, in the process, it's a challenging process. But what we find from psychedelic experiences, there's a lot of studies that have reported people having very, very challenging psychedelic experiences. Some of the most difficult times in their life. However, 84% of these studies reported having a positive long-term benefit to that. So it does suggest that challenging psychedelic experiences can lead to growth. And this is what I'm going to talk about now in terms of the Buddhist practice. So we're in deep in samadhi, analysing the dharmas arising and passing away, as you would do in vipassana. And you have these 16 stages of insight. These are all phenomenological stages where the body is completely dissolved. You're not in a kind of normal conscious state anymore. You're not perceiving the world through your senses. You're in deep, analysing the constructs of consciousness. And you're able to see it very clearly. The fourth stage, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but let's look at the knowledge of arising and passing away. Yeah, so this one is the fourth stage. So this is where people get lots of kundalini experiences, emotions come and go really quickly, starting to see the world dissolve a bit more, this dissolution starting to happen, starting to see the separateness of everything else, starting to see that, oh, I'm not actually a personality or a being, I'm just eye consciousness, ear consciousness, thinking consciousness. All of these things are arising and passing really quickly, as appearing to be a compact thing, in fact it's not. So at this stage, this dissolving is starting to happen. It's quite pleasurable, very ecstatic, very enjoyable. But then we move on to more challenging stages. So this is knowledge of dissolution, a really, really important stage. Bhanganyana. This is where things start to fall away into nothing. And there's a real, it can be quite scary, really, really scary, because you're looking into the abyss and the abyss is staring back at you. So looking at the ground of being, and you're kind of seeing, oh, it's not there, there's nothing there. And so that can be a really terrifying experience, because we base our existence on security in our loved ones, our relationships, ourselves. So it can be very scary to watch that dissolve away, especially in a psychedelic experience. Within the training, they would report or write journals and go to the head monk and discuss their experience, and the monk will kind of steer them or guide them. And if they were having a really hard time, they say, right, go back and do some loving kindness, get yourself steady. So these are really, really important. They say for enlightenment, you have to go through these stages. These are necessary. The terror is necessary, because you have to get rid of the part of you that is clinging on to the things that we think are real, the things that we need satisfaction from. And when that dissolves, then we can find really deep peace and happiness that's not rooted in any conditional experience or any conditional type of life. This is really established wisdom, and it doesn't need anything to exist. It just arises naturally. And so the process to get there is a deconstruction of the self, which is hard. But the maps help us. I think I've got. Okay. Let's have a look. I feel like I've just kind of knocked all of the fun stuff and just gone the fear. But it's kind of an alternative perspective, and I think maybe because I know all the good stuff, it's wonderful, and I know that's probably being talked about a lot at this conference. And so I wanted to offer a different perspective, a different side, which I feel like isn't really acknowledged a lot within within the psychedelic experience, and something that maybe we don't embrace, whereas in fact it's something we can embrace. This fear of dissolving, this dissolution that happens within itself, because in the Buddhist context, it is the main event. It's the most important event, and understanding and experiencing it firsthand is what changes your psychology permanently for the better, to prevent this rumination, to prevent this self-identification where we need conditioned reality to be happy. So this is, I feel like this kind of framework, this narrative, can really inform a psychedelic experience as well, and how maybe we can move forward using some of these preliminary practices to stabilize our experiences, to incline the mind towards more caring, loving kindness type of minds as well. So I will conclude with that. And yes, thanks very much for listening.